Saturday mornings are supposed to be simple, peaceful. For me, it usually meant grabbing a hot cup of coffee, stepping out onto the driveway, and thinking about the small projects I wanted to tackle in the garage. That garage wasn't just a place to store tools in my car, it was my little sanctuary. I'd built workbenches there, collected tools over the years, and even restored an old shelf that once belonged to my grandfather. To anyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary suburban garage. But to me, it was a place of pride. That morning, the air was cool, and the sun had just started warming the street. Birds chirped from the maple trees, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. I even remember telling myself, today's going to be a productive day. I plan to clean out some clutter, fix a loose hinge on the garage door, and maybe even start on a new shelf I'd been meaning to build. Nothing dramatic, just a normal Saturday. But the moment I walked down the front steps, coffee in hand, I froze. My garage door, my entire driveway was completely blocked. A massive mud-streaked pickup truck was parked across it at an angle, taking up not just my driveway but half the street too. The kind of parking job that wasn't just careless, it was deliberate. For a few seconds, I just stood there, blinking at it like maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Who parks directly in front of someone else's garage? Especially when there are plenty of open spaces on the street? I set my coffee mug on the porch railing and walked closer, my stomach tightening with every step. The truck was filthy, the kind of dirt you don't just pick up from driving around town. It looked like it had been through construction sites, maybe even off-road. And the smell, it reeked faintly of gasoline and damp soil. Its sheer size made my sedan look like a toy car in comparison. I glanced around, half hoping someone was nearby to explain this bizarre situation. But the street was quiet, empty. Just me, my blocked garage, and that hulking truck. I muttered under my breath, "You've got to be kidding me." At first, I considered just letting it go. Maybe the driver would be back in a few minutes. Maybe it was an honest mistake. But deep down, I already knew whose truck it was. There was only one neighbor bold or foolish enough to pull something like this. Mr. Harris. Well, technically his name was Brent Harris, but everyone on the street just called him Harris. He had moved in about 3 years earlier, and from the moment he arrived, he'd made his presence known. Loud parties, shouting matches with delivery drivers, arguments over property lines. He wasn't just the kind of neighbor who made things inconvenient, he was the kind who thrived on it. And now, apparently, he was parking his oversized truck in front of my garage. I clenched my jaw and tried to calm myself. Don't jump to conclusions, I thought. Maybe there's some reason for this. Maybe he had a delivery and needed the space temporarily. But even as I gave him the benefit of the doubt, anger bubbled in my chest. My Saturday was supposed to be peaceful. I wasn't in the mood for games. So I marched across the street toward his house. Harris's place looked like a construction zone. The lawn was patchy, cluttered with tools, tarps, and half-finished projects that never seemed to actually get finished. A half-assembled shed sat crooked in his yard, surrounded by piles of lumber. It was as if he loved starting projects but hated following through. The whole scene gave me a headache just looking at it. I knocked firmly on his front door. A few moments later, it creaked open, and there he was leaning against the frame like he'd been expecting me all along. His hair was messy, his shirt stained, and he wore that smug little smirk that instantly set my teeth on edge. "Morning," he said casually, as if nothing was wrong. I gestured back at the truck. "Hey, can you move your truck? You're blocking my garage." He tilted his head, pretending to think. "Oh, that? Yeah, I know." That answer alone nearly made me lose it. "Yeah, I know." No apology, no excuse, just blatant indifference. "Well," I said through gritted teeth, "could you move it, please?" I was planning to get some work done today. He crossed his arms, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe. "See, here's the thing. You've got that strip of land along the side of your garage. What are you even using it for? Nothing, right?" I frowned. "What does that have to do with your truck?" His smirk widened. "Everything. I've been saying it for months. If you just gave me that strip of land, I could extend my driveway." "Problem solved for both of us." I blinked, stunned. Was he serious? He was blocking my garage as a bargaining tactic? "You can't be serious," I said, my voice sharp. "I'm dead serious," he replied. "Think about it. You're not using that land. I need more parking space. You give it to me and," he shrugged, "I'll stop blocking your garage." My chest tightened with fury. I had heard rumors about neighbors pressuring each other over property lines, but this was blatant extortion. I shook my head firmly. "That's not happening, Harris. This is my property, and I'm not giving it up." His smirk faded into something colder, more calculating. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping low. "Fine. Don't be surprised when things get inconvenient for you." The words hung in the air like poison. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear the faint buzz of a lawnmower down the street, the distant chirp of birds. But between us, the tension was thick, suffocating, finally. I turned on my heel and walked back to my house, my heart pounding in my ears. Back on my porch, I picked up my coffee cup, but the coffee had already gone cold. I stared at the blocked garage, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. This wasn't just about a truck. It wasn't even about land. It was about control. Harris wanted to make a point that he could push me, intimidate me, maybe even scare me into giving up what was mine. But as I stood there, staring at that truck, I made a silent promise to myself. I'm not giving in. Not now, not ever. That truck sat in front of my garage like a barricade for the rest of the day. Every time I glanced out the window, it was still there, bold and immovable, as if mocking me. My coffee had gone untouched, my project plans abandoned. Instead of a productive Saturday, I spent the morning pacing my living room, staring through the blinds and wondering what kind of neighbor actually did something like this. By noon, I'd had enough. I wasn't going to let him win by just ignoring it. I marched across the street again, my footsteps sharp against the pavement, my anger building with every stride. When I knocked this time, Harris opened the door slower, dragging out the moment like he wanted me to stew in my own frustration. His smirk was already waiting for me. "Back again?" he drawled, as if I was some unwelcome salesperson instead of the guy whose property he was blocking. I gestured firmly at the truck. "It's been there all morning. Move it, now." He leaned casually against the frame, folding his arms across his chest. His eyes glittered with amusement. "You seem tense. You should relax." "I'll relax when I can get into my own garage," I snapped. "You're trespassing, Harris. This isn't a game." He tilted his head, pretending to think. "See, I wouldn't call it trespassing. The street's public property. I can park wherever I want." I clenched my fists. "You know exactly what you're doing. You're blocking my driveway on purpose." His smirk widened, that smug expression that made me want to knock it right off his face. "Maybe, or maybe it's just coincidence. But if it bothers you so much—" He paused, letting the silence stretch, savoring the control he thought he had over me. "You know what you can do to fix it." My stomach dropped. Here it was, the offer again. "I already told you," I said, my voice low and firm. "That land isn't yours. It never will be." His expression shifted from amusement to irritation. His smirk faded into a sneer. "Why are you being so stubborn? You don't even use it. It's just a strip of grass. You've let it go wild for years. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," I shot back, "is that it's mine. I don't owe you a single square inch of it. The fact that you think you can just bully me into giving it up is insane. For a moment, we just stood there, staring each other down, the air thick with hostility. I could feel my pulse in my temples, every beat screaming, "Don't give in." He finally broke the silence with a sharp laugh. "You really think you're in control here? You think anyone cares about a little patch of land? Let me give you some advice. People who dig their heels in over stupid things usually regret it." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so he couldn't mistake the seriousness in my tone. "And people who cross lines they shouldn't usually regret it more." That made him pause. For just a flicker of a second, his confidence faltered. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. But then, just as quickly, he masked it with another smirk. "You've got guts," he said softly. "I'll give you that. But guts don't get you far around here." I turned to leave, but his voice followed me down the steps like a shadow. "You're making a mistake, neighbor. A big one. Don't say I didn't warn you." I didn't look back. If I had, I might have seen the way his eyes hardened, the way his hand curled into a fist at his side. But I kept walking, each step heavier than the last, my chest burning with anger and unease. Back at my house, I slammed the door harder than I meant to. The sound echoed through the empty rooms, startling even me. I dropped into a chair at the kitchen table and pressed my palms to my temples. What was I supposed to do? Call the police? And say what, that my neighbor was parked in front of my garage? Technically, he wasn't breaking the law if he was on the street. He knew that. He was clever enough to push boundaries without stepping over the line, at least not yet. But the worst part wasn't the truck. It was his words. The way he said, "Don't be surprised when things get inconvenient." That wasn't just an idle threat, it was a promise. I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, analyzing every smirk, every pause. He wanted my land, and he was willing to make my life miserable to get it. But why? Why was that strip of grass so important to him? Was it really just about parking space? Or was there something else he wasn't telling me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized it didn't matter. His reason didn't justify his actions. What mattered was that he thought he could intimidate me, and I refused to let that happen. By late afternoon, the truck was still there. My projects for the day were ruined. I sat by the window, watching, waiting for him to come out, half hoping to catch him in the act of moving it so I could confront him again. But he never did. It just sat there like a monument to his arrogance. As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the street, I finally saw movement. Harris stepped out of his house, phone in hand, laughing at something on the screen. He glanced at me through the window. Oh, he knew I was watching, and then he casually strolled over to the truck. With exaggerated slowness, he climbed inside, revved the engine, and finally pulled away. I should have felt relief. But instead, I felt something darker. This wasn't over. He wasn't just moving his truck out of kindness or even respect. He was moving it because he wanted me to know he was in control. He wanted me to stew all day, to waste my time, to feel powerless. And as I sat there, fists clenched in my lap, I realized something chilling. Today had only been the opening move. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Sunday morning, I tried to reset. I told myself, don't let him get to you. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, turned on the radio, and sat at the table pretending everything was normal. But every creak of the floor, every glance out the window, carried the same dread. Would his truck be back today? Would he try something new? Sure enough, around 9 o'clock, I heard the rumble of that engine. My stomach sank before I even saw it. I pulled the blinds aside just in time to watch him roll his massive pickup right back into place, blocking my garage again. Only this time, he angled it even sharper, as if to say, I own this space now. I slammed my mug onto the counter, hot coffee sloshing over my hand. I didn't even feel the burn. I was too furious. I marched across the street, heart pounding, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. Harris was already leaning against the hood when I got there, arms folded, that smug smirk plastered across his face. He didn't even wait for me to speak. "Morning, neighbor," he said casually, as if he was greeting an old friend. "Sleep well. You think this is funny?" I snapped. He shrugged. "Depends who you ask." "I'm comfortable." He patted the hood like it was a loyal dog. "Move your truck," I demanded. He sighed, long and dramatic, like he was tired of the whole thing. "You just don't get it, do you?" I blinked at him. "Get what?" "This doesn't have to be a problem," he said smoothly. "You give me that strip of land and this all goes away. No more blocked garage, no more tension. Win-win." I could feel my blood boiling. "You're extorting me, Harris." "You can dress it up however you like, but that's what this is. You think if you make my life miserable enough, I'll just hand over part of my property." He leaned closer, lowering his voice so it carried a more sinister edge. "Not think, no." Something in the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. His confidence wasn't just bravado. He genuinely believed he could break me. I forced myself to stay calm, though my pulse was racing. "Let me make this crystal clear. That land is mine. It will always be mine. And the more you push me, the worse it's going to be for you." His eyes narrowed. For the first time, the smirk slipped, replaced by something harder, darker. He studied me for a long moment, like he was weighing how far he could go. Then, slowly, he stepped back and raised his hands as if in surrender. "Fine," he said. "Have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you." His words weren't shouted. They weren't angry. They were quiet, measured like a predator circling prey. I turned and walked back to my house, every step echoing in my head. My hands were trembling when I shut the door behind me. I pressed my back to the wood and took a shaky breath. What had just happened wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even an argument. It was an ultimatum. Give up my land or face the consequences. The rest of that day was torture. I couldn't focus on anything. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every car that passed by made me rush to the window, expecting it to be him. When I finally forced myself outside to mow the lawn, I caught him watching me from across the street. Not smiling this time. Just watching. It felt like a game of chess. Except the board was my neighborhood and every move was meant to wear me down. By Monday morning, I thought maybe he'd cooled off. Maybe the truck was his way of bluffing, and now that I hadn't given in, he'd back down. That illusion lasted until I walked out to leave for work. My car tires were coated in mud. Not a little dirt-thick, wet clump smeared across the rubber, splattered up the sides, streaked across the driveway. I hadn't driven through anything like that. It was deliberate. He'd done it overnight. My stomach turned to ice. I wanted to storm across the street right then, pound on his door, and scream until my voice gave out. But I stopped myself. That's what he wanted. He wanted me reactive, angry, sloppy. So instead, I grabbed a hose and started spraying off the mud, every blast of water releasing a bit of the fury coiled tight inside me. As I worked, I kept replaying his words in my head. "Don't say I didn't warn you." This wasn't going to stop, and I was running out of patience. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, a notepad in front of me, scribbling down options. Call the police? File a complaint with the city? Talk to an attorney? None of it felt satisfying. Without proof, it would just be my word against his. And Harris was the kind of guy who thrived on that gray area. He was careful enough to make everything look like an accident, or at least hard to prove. But the longer I sat there, staring at the notepad, the more one thought hardened in my mind. I couldn't play defense forever. If I wanted this to end, I had to get ahead of him. That's when I remembered the small security camera I bought months ago but never installed. It wasn't fancy, just a motion-activated model with decent resolution. At the time, I bought it thinking it might be useful for packages or the occasional raccoon knocking over trash cans. But now? It felt like my only weapon. I spent the next hour mounting it above the garage, angled just right to catch anyone approaching. As I tightened the last screw, I whispered under my breath, "You want to play games, Harris?" "Fine, let's play." The next day passed uneventfully. No truck blocking my garage. No scratches. No mud. For a brief moment, I wondered if maybe the silent standoff had finally gotten through to him. But that night, as I sat on the couch half watching TV, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the calm before the storm. And I was right, because when I walked into my garage the following morning, my stomach dropped. Things were out of place. Boxes shifted. Shelves disturbed. And worse, tools missing. Not many. Not yet. But enough to prove the point. I stared at the empty space on my workbench where my power drill had been the day before. My chest burned with fury. This wasn't about inconvenience anymore. This was escalation. And in that moment, I knew Harris wasn't going to stop until he took everything he thought he was. The discovery of the missing tools was like a punch in the gut. My garage had always been my sanctuary, the place I tinkered, fixed, and built. It wasn't just about losing a drill or a wrench. It was about violation. Someone had stepped into my space, crossed a line, and made it clear that nothing of mine was off limits anymore, and I didn't need a detective to figure out who that someone was. I stood in the middle of the garage, staring at the workbench like I could will the missing drill back into existence. My hand shook, not from fear, but from rage. I wanted to storm across the street, pound on Harris's door, and demand my property back. I could already picture his smug face, already hear his denial. Prove it. That was the problem. I couldn't prove it. Not yet. I looked up at the little camera I'd installed above the garage. My one glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it had caught something. Inside, I pulled the memory card, slotted it into my laptop, and scrolled through the footage. Hours of nothing, empty driveway, swaying trees, a stray cat wandering across the yard. And then, at 2:14 a.m., motion triggered the camera. The grainy image showed a figure slipping into my driveway. Hood up, movements quick and deliberate. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but the outline, the build, even the swagger in the way he moved, I'd know it anywhere. Harris. He disappeared into the shadows by the garage. When he reemerged, he was carrying something in each hand. One of them, the shape was unmistakable, was my drill. I clenched my fist so tightly my knuckles cracked. I finally had proof. But then another thought hit me like a bucket of cold water. If I marched into the police station with this, would they even care? The guy hadn't stolen a car or broken into my house. To them, it would be neighborly dispute, a petty theft at best. And if Harris caught wind that I'd gone to the cops, he'd escalate further. He'd double down. No, I realized. This was bigger than calling the police. This was about sending a message showing Harris that he'd finally crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The next day, I decided to test him. I deliberately left my garage door open while I worked inside, arranging tools, tightening bolts, making noise. A few times, I caught him peeking from his porch, pretending to sip coffee while his eyes scanned my every move. He knew I'd noticed the missing tools. He was waiting to see how I'd react. So I gave him nothing. I whistled while I worked, as if the world was perfectly normal. But inside, my mind was racing, planning. By mid-afternoon, he strolled over, casual as ever, like he hadn't violated my space the night before. "Afternoon," he said, leaning against the garage frame like he owned it. His eyes flicked across the shelves, lingering just long enough to remind me he knew what was missing. Busy day? I forced a smile. Just organizing. Looks good, he said. Be a shame if anything else. Went missing. The words dripped with venom, but he delivered them so smoothly he could have been commenting on the weather. My jaw tightened. Careful, Harris. Threats have a way of coming back around. For the first time, his smirk faltered. Just for a second. Then he straightened up, tapped the frame twice with his knuckles, and walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, lights off, staring out the window at his porch light glowing faintly across the street. Every shadow looked like movement, every gust of wind like footsteps. Around midnight, I finally sat down, notebook in hand. If Harris wanted a war of attrition, then fine, I'd give him one. But I wouldn't play defense anymore. The retaliation began small. The next morning, before heading to work, I took a walk around the neighborhood carrying nothing but a cup of coffee. To any casual observer, I looked like a man enjoying fresh air. But in reality, I was scouting, marking which cars belonged to him, which trash cans were his, where his weak spots were. That evening, I made my move. I waited until dusk, when most of the street was quiet, and strolled past his driveway. His shiny pickup sat there, polished like it had just come off the lot. I stopped, tied my shoe, and as I crouched down, I slipped a small piece of gravel under each of his windshield wipers. Not enough to damage anything, but enough to create the most irritating squeal when he used them. Petty? Absolutely. But it was a start. The next morning, I watched from my window as Harris climbed into his truck. A few minutes later, the wipers squealed across his windshield. He stopped, leaned forward, fiddled with them, clearly confused. I smiled to myself. It wasn't revenge, not really. But it was a reminder. I could get under his skin, too. But Harris wasn't the type to let anything slide. That same night, I went out to bring the trash cans in and froze. Spray paint glared back at me from the side of my garage door. One word, in dripping red letters. Mine. My chest tightened. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst out of my rib cage. This wasn't a game anymore. He wasn't just taking tools or blocking my garage. He was staking a claim, mocking me, taunting me, daring me to fight back. I snapped a photo for evidence, but as I stared at the screen, something shifted inside me. The fear that had been gnawing at me for days hardened into something sharper. Determination. Harris wanted to escalate? Fine. I'd escalate too. The next morning, I took a trip to the hardware store. When I came back, I didn't just repair the spray paint damage, I installed 2 more cameras, one facing the driveway, the other angled toward the street. I wanted him to know I was watching now. Sure enough, later that day, I caught him glaring at the cameras as he strolled by. He didn't say anything, but the tension in his jaw, the way his fists clenched at his sides, it told me everything. This wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. That night, as I sat on the porch with the camera's live feed pulled up on my phone, I realized something important. Harris thought he could wear me down, push me until I broke. But he'd underestimated me. I wasn't going to break. I was going to fight back, and when this was over, it wouldn't be my garage or my tools, or my land in question. It would be his pride. His smug little empire across the street was about to crumble. I would make sure of it. By the time the weekend rolled around, the neighborhood could feel it. This wasn't just a spat between 2 men anymore. It was a standoff, and everyone was starting to notice. I tried to act normal, mowing the lawn, washing my car, trimming the hedges. But I could feel eyes on me. Curtains twitched. Neighbors lingered a little longer by their mailboxes, their conversations hushed. Word had spread. Harris and I were at war. And Harris loved the attention. Saturday morning, he made his grand move. I heard the roar of his truck and glanced out the window. He wasn't blocking my garage this time. Instead, he parked directly across from my driveway, tailgate down, as if he were hosting some sort of open-air show. Then he began unloading. Chairs, a cooler, even a small portable grill. Within half an hour, he had set up a mini campsite right in front of my house. He cracked open a beer, leaned back in his chair, and waved at every passing car. It was a message. Clear as day. This is my territory now. I stood in my yard, hose in hand, staring. My jaw clenched so tight it ached. Morning, he called, raising his can in a mock toast. Beautiful day, isn't it? I didn't respond. Instead, I turned off the hose, walked inside, and shut the door. Not because I was scared, but because I knew if I stayed out there another second, I'd do something reckless. Inside, my phone buzzed. It was Pam, my next-door neighbor. You seen this circus? She asked, her voice a mix of annoyance and sympathy. Yeah, I muttered. He's making a fool of himself. Half the block's talking about it. Good, I said. Let them talk. Maybe it'll show them what kind of man he really is. Pam was quiet for a moment before adding, just be careful. Guys like him don't stop until someone makes them. I knew she was right. And I also knew that someone was me. By noon, Harris had drawn a small crowd. Not friend spectators. A couple of neighbors had wandered over curious, pretending to be interested in his grill while really just feeding off the drama. Harris basked in it, laughing too loudly, cracking jokes at my expense. Careful, I heard him say at one point, gesturing toward my house. Don't step too close, or he'll call the cops about trespassing. Laughter followed. Not everyone joined in, but enough to sting. I felt my ears burn. My fists curled at my sides. This wasn't just about me anymore. He was poisoning the neighborhood against me, turning my refusal into a spectacle. And that's when I decided enough was enough. Late that afternoon, when most of the crowd had dispersed, I walked straight across the street. Harris was still slouched in his chair, beer in hand, looking smug. Enjoying yourself? I asked. He grinned. Best weekend I've had in years. Thanks for the entertainment. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear me. This ends today. Pack it up, or I'll make sure you regret it. His grin widened. There it is. The big threat. Took you long enough. I'm not threatening, I said evenly. I'm promising. His eyes hardened. For a moment, the playful facade dropped, and I saw the man underneath the bully. The predator. Then he leaned back and chuckled. You can draw your little line in the sand all you want, neighbor. Just remember, lines can be erased. That night, I sat on my porch, notebook in hand again. But this time, I wasn't jotting ideas or frustrations. I was making a plan. Step 1. Expose him. He thrived on ambiguity, petty vandalism, whispered insults, little games designed to drive me mad while making it look like I was overreacting. But if I could shine a light on his behavior, show the neighborhood what he was really doing, I could turn the tide. Step 2. Hit him where it hurt. Harris's pride wasn't in his house or his yard, it was in his reputation. He wanted to be the big man on the block, the neighbor everyone respected, or at least feared. If I stripped that away, he'd have nothing left. The opportunity came faster than I expected. Sunday morning, I checked the footage from my cameras. At 3:47 a.m., there he was again, creeping across my driveway. This time, he tried to unscrew the camera itself. But what he didn't know was that I had installed two obvious. One hidden dot, so while the first one caught him fiddling, the second caught his face in perfect detail. Hood pulled back, eyes glaring, mouth set in determination. It was undeniable. I stared at the freeze frame for a long time, my heart racing. This was it. This was my weapon. By noon, most of the neighborhood was outside again. Kids on bikes, parents mowing lawns. Harris lounging in his chair like a king. I walked out, phone in hand, and crossed to the middle of the street. "Hey everyone," I called. My voice carried farther than I expected. Conversation stilled. Heads turned. Even Harris sat up a little straighter. "I think you all deserve to see something." I held up my phone, thumbed the screen, and let the video play. Harris, in the dead of night, caught red-handed trying to tamper with my camera. His face glowing in the infrared light, clear as day. Gasps rippled through the group. Whispers followed. I turned the screen toward Harris. "Care to explain this?" For once, he had no smirk ready. His mouth opened, then closed. His face flushed red, and he muttered something under his breath. Pam stepped forward. "So that's who's been causing all this trouble." Others nodded. A few people gave Harris looks of pure disgust. The tide was shifting. He sprang to his feet, fists clenched. "You think this proves anything?" "Maybe I was checking on your property, making sure nobody else was messing with it." The excuse was weak, and he knew it. Murmurs of disbelief spread through the crowd. I met his glare, steady and unflinching. "You've crossed the line, Harris." And everyone here knows it now. For a long, tense moment, we just stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, without another word, he kicked his chair over, slammed his truck door shut, and peeled away down the street, engine roaring. The sound echoed long after he was gone. The neighborhood dispersed slowly, but the mood had changed. People stopped by my yard, offering words of support. Pam gave me a nod that said, "Well played," but as I stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew this wasn't over. Harris wouldn't slink away quietly. If anything, I had just drawn the deepest line in the sand yet, and he would be back to cross it. The night after I exposed, Harris felt almost peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I sat on my porch without feeling like I had to watch every shadow. The neighborhood had seen the truth. Harris had stormed off humiliated. Maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. But deep down, I knew better. Men like Harris didn't back down. They doubled down. Sure enough, the next morning I found his answer waiting for me. I walked outside, coffee in hand, and stopped dead in my tracks. My car sat in the driveway, every tire slashed. All four of them. The rubber was shredded into jagged ribbons, the rims resting pitifully against the pavement. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the concrete, hot coffee spreading across my shoes. My heart pounded, my fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. This wasn't petty vandalism anymore. This was escalation. Violence. And it was personal. I snapped photos from every angle, then pulled the memory cards from both cameras. Sure enough, the hidden one caught him again 2:51 a.m., crouched low, knife glinting as he jabbed into each tire. His face was twisted in concentration, lips curled into a satisfied grin. I clenched my jaw so tightly my teeth ached. I had him. This wasn't a prank. This was destruction of property. Hundreds of dollars worth. No excuse, no way out, and yet part of me hesitated. If I took this to the police, would they actually do anything? Sure, it was clear evidence, but I'd been down this road before with petty disputes. Sometimes the system just shrugged out, but another part of me, the part that had been quiet until now, whispered something darker. Why call the police when you can handle it yourself? By midday, the neighborhood knew. Cars slowed as they passed. Pam came over, her face pale. "Oh my God," she said, staring at the tires. "This is insane." "You have to call the cops. I've got him on camera," I said through clenched teeth. "Then that's it," she insisted. "He can't talk his way out of this. He'll finally pay for what he's done." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that showing the footage would end this nightmare. But I could still hear Harris's voice in my head. Lines can be erased. He wasn't afraid of consequences. He was daring me to make the next move. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the footage pulled up again. Frame by frame, I watched him stab my tires, crouch low, glance over his shoulder. And something inside me shifted. I was tired of reacting. Tired of being the one picking up the pieces. No. If Harris wanted escalation, he was about to see what that really meant. The first step was subtle. I printed stills from the video, his face illuminated, knife in hand, and slipped one into every mailbox on the street. No note, no explanation. Just the image. By the following morning, whispers buzzed through the neighborhood like electricity. People avoided his porch. Conversations cut off when he walked by. The same crowd that had laughed at his jokes a week ago now crossed the street to avoid him. I watched from my window as he stormed out to grab his mail, ripping the photo in half the moment he saw it. His face turned crimson. He looked around wildly, scanning the houses like a trapped animal. For once, it wasn't me under the spotlight. It was him, but Harris didn't crumble. He struck back. That night, just after midnight, I woke to a sound that froze my blood. A crackling roar, followed by the acrid stench of smoke. I bolted upright, heart hammering. Through the window, I saw orange flickers licking up from my trash cans at the curb. Flames snapped and hissed, shadows dancing across the street. I raced outside, grabbing the hose, dousing the fire until my lungs burned from the smoke. Neighbors peeked out of windows, murmurs echoing down the street. By the time the last ember died, I was trembling. Not just from adrenaline, but from realization. He'd set fire to my property. If the wind had been stronger, if the flames had spread, my house could have gone up. My life could have been in danger. This wasn't escalation anymore. This was war. The next morning I filed a police report. I gave them the footage, the photos, everything. They promised to look into it, but their tone carried that weary edge I'd heard before. As if they were already picturing the paperwork piling up, another dispute between neighbors that might never stick. I walked out of the station feeling no safer than when I'd gone in. Harris was waiting when I got home. Not on his porch this time, but leaning against the hood of his truck in full view, arms crossed, eyes locked on me. "How's the car?" he called, voice dripping with mockery. I didn't answer. "How's the trash?" I clenched my fists, forcing myself to keep walking toward my house. But he wasn't finished. "You think your little pictures scare me? Think the cops are gonna save you?" He laughed, sharp and bitter. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I stopped halfway up the driveway, turned, and met his gaze. My voice was steady, but it carried all the fire inside me. "You're right," I said. "I don't know who I'm dealing with." "But you're about to find out who you're dealing with." His grin faltered. Just for a second. Then I went inside and shut the door. That night, as I sat at the table staring at the blank pages of my notebook, I realized something important. Harris had crossed into arson, into violence. And the police weren't enough. If I wanted to end this, truly end it, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. The line in the sand wasn't just drawn anymore. It was burning. And sooner or later, one of us was going to be consumed by it. The week after the trash fire felt like walking on glass. Every sound was amplified. Tires on pavement, a dog barking 2 streets over, a slam of a mailbox. I slept in bursts, waking at the slightest creak, scanning the porch light, checking the camera feeds. The police had taken the report, but their reassurances were thin. "We'll follow up. We'll increase patrols this week." They said the right words, but they moved like bureaucracy always moves, slow, polite, impotent. Meanwhile, Harris prowled the neighborhood like a man who'd lost his mind and found a new purpose. He'd stop and glare as he passed, mutter under his breath, and once, while I was sweeping the driveway, he drove by so slowly I could read the brand on his hat. Each small act was a message. I'm still here. I'm not broken. On a Wednesday evening, when the sky was the color of a bruise and the street lamps had that lazy orange glow, the house across the road threw up party music, laughter, the clink of glasses. I tried to ignore it, but the noise threaded through the tension like salt in a wound. At about 10, the music hit a high point, and then, like someone had flipped a switch, it cut off. Silence fell, and then the shouting started. I went outside because I thought maybe someone was hurt. A crowd had gathered, neighbors clustered in small groups like driftwood. Heads turned as I approached. Pam was there, arms folded, cheeks flushed. "You should see this," she said down the street. Harris stood in the middle of the road, face red, finger pointing at a young guy from 2 houses down. "You think you can talk about me behind my back?" He was shouting. "You call me a thief, you call me a liar, say it again and see what happens." The young man, Jake, looked stunned. "I didn't say anything," he stammered. "I just asked why you were messing with his property." Harris lunged, then fast, unpredictable. He shoved Jake hard in the chest. The shove knocked him back into Pam's car with a sickening thud. Gasps rose and some people moved toward them, hands raised, trying to separate the men. I was 2 houses away and my legs moved before I could think. I stepped into the crowd and pushed my way forward. "Hey, that's enough," I shouted. My voice was small against the crackling tension. Harris spun and locked eyes with me. For a second, everything narrowed to him and me. "You got something to say?" He spat. "Yeah," I said, the words tasting like iron. "Walk away." He took a step toward me. His jaw worked. I could see the muscles clench. "Make me." The street tightened. Old Mrs. Dunn, who rarely left her porch, had come out and was watching like everyone else, hands clasped over her mouth. Someone called the police. A car's distant siren hummed like a promise. But before help could arrive, everything tipped. Harris shoved me. Hard. The force sent me back 1 foot, 2, and then I found my balance. Anger, pure and white, swallowed the fear. I grabbed his shoulder, turned him, and shoved him back with a force I didn't know I had. He stumbled, caught himself on his truck, and when he looked at me, his eyes were small and furious. "This ends now," I said. My voice was low, dangerous. "Enough," he laughed, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. For a heartbeat, I thought he might start his truck and run me over. Instead, he fumbled, then tossed the keys onto the hood like a challenge. "You think you can make me out to be a monster?" He snarled. "I'll show you a monster." At that moment, the blue and red lights cut across the street and the police cruisers pulled up. Officers jumped out, hands on holsters, orders clipped into the air. The crowd parted, some sighing in relief, others watching with wary eyes. 2 officers moved between us and separated Harris and me. They wanted statements, but the adrenaline had left my head buzzing. I gave mine short, factual. He gave his, loud and theatrical, accusing everyone else of starting the problem. The officers took the footage from my cameras, photographed the slashed tires, and wrote down neighbor after neighbor's name as witnesses. One officer, younger, stayed behind after the formalities. He looked me in the eye and said quietly, "We can press charges if you want: criminal mischief, intimidation, possibly assault. You've got a stack of evidence." His honesty felt like an oasis in a desert of uncertainty. Stared at the officers as they drove away, the street slowly exhaling. For the first time, I felt something approach like hope. Maybe this would finally force the legal system to act. Maybe it would be the peg that held together everything else I'd been trying to do. But the next morning, when I opened my front door, the neighborhood's fragile calm, split like glass dot. My yard was a field of broken things. My mailbox was ripped from its post and thrown into the hibiscus bush, the wood splintered. My mailbox flag had been bent into a jagged fang. A garden gnome, an ugly one I'd hated, was face down, nose chipped. My trash bins were overturned, contents scattered like confetti. Someone had taken a hammer to the ornamental lantern by the path, denting it so hard the glass spider web ed. At first I thought it was the work of kids. But then I saw the note pinned to the splintered mailbox with a bent nail. The paper was soaked with dew, the ink blotched, one sentence scrawled in a shaky hand. "Stop or else." My hands went numb. The cameras had caught him before. Would they catch this? I ran inside, pulled up the feed, and my stomach dropped. At 3:22 a.m., a shadow moved through my yard. It was too quick, too practiced. Whoever did this knew where to strike to cause maximum humiliation with minimal evidence. I called the police. They came, took pictures, and asked the same questions they always do. Who might want to do this? Do you have enemies? Has anything else happened? I showed them the previously submitted footage. The officer who had stayed late the other night frowned and said, "We'll step up patrols." It was the same line, but this time it sounded brittle. That night, sleep was gone. I sat at my kitchen table and watched the street through the security camera app on my phone for hours, thumb hovering over the record button. My mind spun through possibilities: press charges and hope for justice, or take more covert action to stop him once and for all. Around midnight, a car rolled slowly by, no headlights, just the faint glow of a dashboard. A figure stepped out, gloved hands working quickly. They moved like someone who had practiced the route, who knew exactly where the camera blind spots were. My stomach clenched. They were careful, too careful. This wasn't a man acting alone in a vacuum. This looked like planning. I grabbed my keys, my voice gone hoarse. I thought about following, about confronting whoever it was, about catching them in the act. For a reckless second, I considered grabbing a baseball bat and scaring them off. Then I remembered the officer's words: "We can press charges." If I acted rashly and got arrested for assault or trespassing, I'd lose moral high ground, legal standing, and momentum. So I did the hardest thing. I recorded everything. Full feed, time-stamped, backed up to multiple drives. I left lights on, left the porch camera angled to capture the yard, and then I sat in the dark, phone in hand, waiting. Waiting felt like a decision itself, one of the few good ones I'd made in weeks. At 2:49 a.m., the figure returned. This time there were two. One distracted the walkway with movement while the other worked on the mailbox. The hidden camera, slightly out of their imagined blind spot, caught a jacket with a logo. I recognized. It was from a landscaping crew Harris had hired 3 months earlier. The pattern matched a shirt I'd seen him wear at his barbecue. My pulse hammered. Proof at last, but not the neat, obvious kind. It was messy, implicating other people, raising the peril of who might be involved. If Harris had been playing alone, we could have handled him. If he'd recruited others, then the danger multiplied. This was no longer a single bully with a temper. This was a man willing to marshal resources to terrorize a neighbor. When morning came, I had the footage edited and ready. I drove to the station, again with a hard knot in my stomach and a folder thick with evidence. The officer who took the file listened, his face unreadable. "This is substantial," he said finally. "It gives us probable cause to investigate beyond a basic patrol." It felt like a small victory. It felt like the moment would break the spell Harris had been casting over the block. But I also felt the weight of knowing that once the law got involved, there would be no easy way back. Relationships would be torn, reputations ruined, and someone, maybe more than one someone, could end up paying a heavy price. Breaking point had arrived for more than just me. For Harris. For the neighbors who'd tolerated his behavior. For the block itself, which had to choose between allowing fear to rule or standing up together. There was no neutral ground left. The only question now was whether the law would come fast enough to stop what was about to happen next. The police station smelled faintly of burnt coffee and floor polish, a strange blend that somehow matched the heavy tension in my chest. I sat in a plastic chair, evidence folder clutched in my hands, while an officer typed at a computer behind thick glass. My thumb rubbed the corner of the manila file until the paper went soft. Inside was everything: the footage, the still images, the timestamps, the note, the vandalism. Proof, or so I hoped. When they finally called me in, it wasn't the young officer I had spoken to before, but a detective in a gray suit, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He introduced himself as Detective Sanders, voice steady and professional. He laid my folder on the desk like it was a patient being prepped for surgery. "I've reviewed the initial reports," he said, flipping through the documents. "This looks like a sustained campaign of harassment and property damage. With the video, we can pursue charges: criminal mischief, harassment, trespassing, maybe even conspiracy. If we tie in those other figures you captured," the word conspiracy hit me like a cold gust. I hadn't thought of it that way, hadn't let myself imagine Harris as anything more than a lone wolf. But the images didn't lie. He had help. And help meant planning. "What happens now?" I asked. Sanders leaned back, laced his fingers. "We'll open a formal investigation. I'll need statements from the neighbors who witnessed the altercations. The footage will need chain of custody logging so it stands in court. Once we have enough, we'll take it to the district attorney." Relief washed over me, sharp and dangerous, like the first step on ice. Finally, movement. But it was paired with dread. Harris wasn't the kind of man who would sit quietly while the law circled. He would lash out. By the time I drove home, word had already spread. Pam was waiting on her porch with a mug of coffee. "They came by," she called out as I pulled into the driveway. Asked for my statement. I told them everything. Her voice carried a satisfaction I hadn't heard in weeks. Others waved as I walked inside. The tide was turning, at least for now, but Harris noticed too. That evening, I caught him pacing his yard, phone pressed tight to his ear, movements sharp. Later, his wife stormed out, suitcase in hand, face streaked with tears. She drove away without looking back. For the first time, Harris's fortress showed cracks. 2 days later, Sanders called me into the station again. This time, Harris was there too. We sat on opposite sides of the waiting area, not speaking, his glare heavy enough to crush bone. His lawyer, a slick man in a navy suit, leaned in close, whispering into his ear. Harris nodded, jaw set like granite. They called us separately. When my turn came, I explained everything again, carefully, clearly. Sanders nodded along, asking pointed questions, his pen scratching. "Did you ever threaten him with violence? Did you ever touch his property in retaliation? Did you ever encourage others to act against him?" My answers were all no, though my memory replayed that night in the street when I shoved Harris back. Would that matter? When I left the room, Harris was waiting. He smirked, leaned close, and hissed under his breath. "You think you're winning? I'll bury you in paperwork and court dates. You'll regret ever stepping up." I said nothing, but inside I knew this wasn't just about police anymore. This was about lawyers, judges, filings, and fees. Harris had money, stubbornness, and spite. That combination was deadly. The first legal blow landed the next week. A thick envelope appeared on my porch, a notice of civil action. Harris was suing me for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. The irony was so heavy I laughed out loud, though the sound caught in my throat halfway. His lawyer had twisted the narrative. I was the aggressor, the bully, the liar spreading falsehoods to ruin his reputation. I took the papers to a local attorney, Ms. Clark, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair tied neatly at her neck. She read them quickly, then set them down with a sigh. "This is intimidation," she said. "A counterattack to muddy the waters. Classic strategy. But with your evidence, it won't hold." Her calm steadied me. She agreed to take the case and file a response, flipping the lawsuit back toward Harris. But it would take months, maybe longer. "The good news," she said, "is that your criminal complaint has more weight. If charges are filed and stick, the civil action crumbles." He knows that. That's why he filed first. The thought hit hard. Harris wasn't just reacting. He was playing chess, moving pieces 3 steps ahead. And I was still learning the rules. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had chosen sides. Some avoided me, afraid of getting involved. But others rallied: Pam, Jake, the Dunns. At night, I'd see porch lights blinking in a quiet kind of solidarity. A few left notes in my mailbox. "Stay strong. We're with you." It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the fear from swallowing me whole. Still, Harris wasn't done. The cameras caught him one evening standing on his porch, yelling into the darkness about traitors and liars, voice slurred. His truck was parked crooked, the hood dented like it had hit something. The footage made him look unhinged, which was good for court, but terrifying for me, living 20 yards away. The breakthrough came when Sanders called again. "We pulled phone records," he said, "and we've got something interesting." Around the time of the vandalism, Harris was exchanging texts with 2 men, both former employees from the landscaping crew you mentioned. "They've got priors for petty theft." Hearing that was like feeling the pieces click into place. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. "A web. Conspiracy. We're moving forward," Sanders said. "The DA is reviewing charges for criminal mischief, conspiracy to commit harassment, and possibly witness intimidation." It's not small stuff. I hung up and felt the air rush out of me. Victory wasn't guaranteed, but for the first time, it felt possible. Harris had overreached. He wasn't just a neighbor with a grudge, he was a man building his own downfall, brick by brick. But the fight wasn't finished. The very next day, a letter appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside, one line was typed in block letters: "Drop the case or lose more than tools." My blood ran cold. It was no longer just about property, reputation, or ego. Now it was about safety, mine, my family's, maybe even the neighbors who had stood with me. I took the letter straight to Sanders. He studied it carefully, jaw tightening. "This crosses into felony territory. Witness intimidation, threat of harm. It strengthens our case, but it also means he or someone working for him is desperate. You need to be careful. Double-check your locks. Don't walk alone at night. And let your neighbors know." Walking back into my house that evening, letter still in my pocket, I felt the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. The evidence was mounting, the law was stirring, but Harris was cornered, and a cornered man can be the most dangerous kind. The legal fight had begun in earnest. And while the truth was on my side, the road ahead was a battlefield lined with paperwork, hearings, whispered threats, and nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what Harris might do. Next, the war for justice wasn't just being fought in court. It was being fought in every shadow that fell across my lawn. The police station smelled faintly of burnt coffee and floor polish, a strange blend that somehow matched the heavy tension in my chest. I sat in a plastic chair, evidence folder clutched in my hands, while an officer typed at a computer behind thick glass. My thumb rubbed the corner of the manila file until the paper went soft. Inside was everything: the footage, the still images, the timestamps, the note, the vandalism. Proof, or so I hoped. When they finally called me in, it wasn't the young officer I had spoken to before, but a detective in a gray suit, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He introduced himself as Detective Sanders, voice steady and professional. He laid my folder on the desk like it was a patient being prepped for surgery. "I've reviewed the initial reports," he said, flipping through the documents. "This looks like a sustained campaign of harassment and property damage. With the video, we can pursue charges criminal mischief, harassment, trespassing, maybe even conspiracy if we tie in those other figures you captured." The word conspiracy hit me like a cold gust. I hadn't thought of it that way, hadn't let myself imagine Harris as anything more than a lone wolf. But the images didn't lie. He had help. And help meant planning. "What happens now?" I asked. Sanders leaned back, laced his fingers. "We'll open a formal investigation. I'll need statements from the neighbors who witnessed the altercations. The footage will need chain of custody logging so it stands in court. Once we have enough, we'll take it to the district attorney." Relief washed over me, sharp and dangerous, like the first step on ice. Finally, movement. But it was paired with dread. Harris wasn't the kind of man who would sit quietly while the law circled. He would lash out. By the time I drove home, word had already spread. Pam was waiting on her porch with a mug of coffee. "They came by," she called out as I pulled into the driveway. Asked for my statement. I told them everything. Her voice carried a satisfaction I hadn't heard in weeks. Others waved as I walked inside. The tide was turning, at least for now, but Harris noticed too. That evening, I caught him pacing his yard, phone pressed tight to his ear, movements sharp. Later, his wife stormed out, suitcase in hand, face streaked with tears. She drove away without looking back. For the first time, Harris's fortress showed cracks. 2 days later, Sanders called me into the station again. This time, Harris was there too. We sat on opposite sides of the waiting area, not speaking, his glare heavy enough to crush bone. His lawyer, a slick man in a navy suit, leaned in close, whispering into his ear. Harris nodded, jaw set like granite. They called us separately. When my turn came, I explained everything again, carefully, clearly. Sanders nodded along, asking pointed questions, his pen scratching. "Did you ever threaten him with violence? Did you ever touch his property in retaliation? Did you ever encourage others to act against him?" My answers were all no, though my memory replayed that night in the street when I shoved Harris back. Would that matter? When I left the room, Harris was waiting. He smirked, leaned close, and hissed under his breath, "You think you're winning? I'll bury you in paperwork and court dates. You'll regret ever stepping up." I said nothing, but inside I knew this wasn't just about police anymore. This was about lawyers, judges, filings, and fees. Harris had money, stubbornness, and spite. That combination was deadly. The first legal blow landed the next week. A thick envelope appeared on my porch, a notice of civil action. Harris was suing me for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. The irony was so heavy I laughed out loud, though the sound caught in my throat halfway. His lawyer had twisted the narrative. I was the aggressor, the bully, the liar spreading falsehoods to ruin his reputation. I took the papers to a local attorney, Ms. Clark, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair tied neatly at her neck. She read them quickly, then set them down with a sigh. "This is intimidation," she said. "A counterattack to muddy the waters. Classic strategy. But with your evidence, it won't hold." Her calm steadied me. She agreed to take the case and file a response, flipping the lawsuit back toward Harris. But it would take months, maybe longer. "The good news," she said, "is that your criminal complaint has more weight. If charges are filed and stick, the civil action crumbles." He knows that. That's why he filed first. The thought hit hard. Harris wasn't just reacting. He was playing chess, moving pieces 3 steps ahead. And I was still learning the rules. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had chosen sides. Some avoided me, afraid of getting involved. But others rallied Pam, Jake, the Duns. At night, I'd see porch lights blinking in a quiet kind of solidarity. A few left notes in my mailbox. Stay strong. We're with you. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the fear from swallowing me whole. Still, Harris wasn't done. The cameras caught him one evening standing on his porch, yelling into the darkness about traitors and liars, voice slurred. His truck was parked crooked, the hood dented like it had hit something. The footage made him look unhinged, which was good for court, but terrifying for me. Living 20 yards away, the breakthrough came when Sanders called again. "We pulled phone records," he said, "and we've got something interesting." Around the time of the vandalism, Harris was exchanging texts with two men, both former employees from the landscaping crew you mentioned. They've got priors for petty theft. Hearing that was like feeling the pieces click into place. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. A web. Conspiracy. "We're moving forward," Sanders said. "The DA is reviewing charges for criminal mischief, conspiracy to commit harassment, and possibly witness intimidation." It's not small stuff. I hung up and felt the air rush out of me. Victory wasn't guaranteed, but for the first time, it felt possible. Harris had overreached. He wasn't just a neighbor with a grudge. He was a man building his own downfall, brick by brick. But the fight wasn't finished. The very next day, a letter appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside, one line was typed in block letters. "Drop the case or lose more than tools." My blood ran cold. It was no longer just about property, reputation, or ego. Now it was about safety, mine, my family's, maybe even the neighbors who had stood with me. I took the letter straight to Sanders. He studied it carefully, jaw tightening. "This crosses into felony territory. Witness intimidation, threat of harm. It strengthens our case, but it also means he or someone working for him is desperate. You need to be careful. Double-check your locks. Don't walk alone at night. And let your neighbors know." Walking back into my house that evening, letter still in my pocket, I felt the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. The evidence was mounting, the law was stirring, but Harris was cornered, and a cornered man can be the most dangerous kind. The legal fight had begun in earnest. And while the truth was on my side, the road ahead was a battlefield lined with paperwork, hearings, whispered threats, and nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering what Harris might do. Next, the war for justice wasn't just being fought in court. It was being fought in every shadow that fell across my lawn.